Welcome back, America. It's great to have former Secretary of State, former CIA Chief Mike Pompeo with us. But also, Mike Pompeo, even though he's sort of boxed in many people's minds on foreign policy, he actually has a breadth of knowledge when it comes to domestic policy and the law. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, Mr. Secretary, what do you make of this Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs case?
Well, it's a good decision. It's a good decision because it's deeply grounded in our Constitution and in America's founding and its history. It's a lovely thing, too. It'll protect more human lives. It'll return this debate to the states, where it was for, goodness, 150, 200 years. We should be proud of that decision today because the court got it right. I hope everybody who's talking about the Constitution and making sure that liberty and democracy stand recognizes that this decision certainly did that. They gave power back to the state. They didn't pull it into the courts. They let the political processes be where they ought to be. And for that, it is a remarkable decision overturning a horrible decision from 1973.
How often have you seen in your time in Washington or observing government an institution say, we don't have power? We don't have the authority. Give it back to the people in the states. I've never seen it before.
Yeah, it is. If it's happened before, we'll have to go look pretty hard for it, Mark. The only thing I've ever seen that's kind of like that is actually a sad example of it, where I saw members of Congress say they didn't have power that they actually had because they didn't want to take responsibility for their actions. They had the responsibility to their constituents, and they said, no, we're going to let the courts sort that out. This is just the reverse of that. They got their institutional power exactly right. They honored our founders and our nation and our Judeo-Christian heritage, and at the same time will give the opportunity for those of us who believe that each one of these babies is precious the chance to go out and make that case to the American people.
Secretary Mike Pompeo, it's my contention, and I might be wrong. I'm curious about your opinion. You wrote a fantastic piece in the National Interest called China and Economic Security in the Shadow of Ukraine, and it's much broader than that, going in about how they're building up their military, how we're kind of flatlining in this regard. My concern is China, as you point out, is preparing for war, and we are preparing for nothing. What do you make of this?
Yes, Mark, I think that's true. In some sense, and in some places, I actually think it's worse than that. We're moving backwards. We've moved wokeism, diversity, and inclusion to the top of our national security interests, right? We put climate change at the top of that instead of actually doing what we did remarkably for 4 years. We protected the United States of America without resorting to the use of our military power to do that in a way that had been done 20 years and 30 years before that. We got deterrence right in the classic model of peace through strength, came from President Reagan and how we took down the Soviet Union in the 1980s and early 1990s. That is a historic precedent that America has walked away from, frankly, under Republicans and Democrats alike. Republicans too prepared to send the 82nd Airborne to hard places instead of using the real power of America. That's what I wrote about in this piece. The threat from the Chinese Communist Party is perhaps even greater than that from the Soviet Union. The fight in Ukraine today is connected to that deeply, and our economic interests. If you're a machine shop worker in Wichita, Kansas, where I ran a small company there making machine parts, or you sit in Des Moines or Manchester, these things really impact you. What happens in Kyiv or Moscow doesn't stay there. We have to get this right, both to protect our nation and make sure that we have the opportunity to continue to be prosperous in the way we have for the last couple hundred years.
But, Mr. Secretary, we have a president who doesn't rally the nation. We have a president that doesn't work with Congress to build up our military. Congress on its own is trying to build up the military. You can see China's on the move. I mean, unless you're an ostrich and have your head in the sand, whether it's West Africa, whether it's the Solomon Islands, whether it is the Panama Canal, the South China Sea, which they have really an iron fist on right now. They're preparing to invade Taiwan. They've destroyed Hong Kong. They're putting a lot of resources into a lot of countries in order to take their ports if they can. They're threatening the Philippines and Vietnam. They're threatening South Korea. They're threatening Japan. What is it about this administration? Are they really that stupid?
Boy, President Obama talked about pivoting to Asia, did nothing. This president says we're back. Well, they're indeed back to the fecklessness when it comes to challenge the Chinese Communist Party. You know, I think there's, on this one, Mark, I think there's three things. First, I think you have a president who is unwilling to use the power that America has, our economic might, to protect the things that matter. So you rip through a list of things all across the world, ports in Africa and Asia, Southeast Asia, South Pacific, That is all true. Don't forget the decimation that's been inflicted on the world because of the Wuhan virus. And we shouldn't forget the billions of dollars in wealth that have been stolen by the Chinese Communist Party right here at home, and the millions of American jobs that flowed from that. This administration doesn't see that. I think in part it's because of the climate change folks who put that as their top priority. The first person to go meet with Xi Jinping from this administration wasn't Secretary Blinken, it wasn't Secretary Austin, it wasn't President Biden. It was former Secretary of State Kerry, the climate guy, was sent to Beijing to tell him this is what America demands, not something that remotely gives Xi Jinping any heartburn to lie to John Kerry. And second, I think they're in the enthrall of big institutions in the United States of America. There's a lot of greedy companies making a lot of money in the Chinese Communist Party, with working alongside the Chinese Communist Party today. And whether it's Hollywood, whether it's our technology companies, or even financial institutions, they are working in China in ways that are deeply detrimental to the people of the United States of America. And I think the Biden administration is allowing them to do that in ways that they have to know hurt ordinary Americans.
You know, Mr. Secretary, maybe I'm getting too old, but I remember a day when corporations were patriotic. And I remember a day when athletes would leave their positions on a team to join the United States military. Today they trash the country. Today they make a fortune with our enemy, China, whether it's sneakers or jerseys or whatever it is. Same with corporations like Apple, Coca-Cola, and many, many others. When we come back, here's the big question I'd like to ask you. If we were to have a confrontation with China in the next several weeks, who would win? We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. We're with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who was a fantastically successful Secretary of State. Mr. Secretary, China versus the United States, who would win?
We'll win. We'll win. But unfortunately, if we could ask that question 5 years or 10 years from now, and we continue to follow the same policy of weakness that the Biden administration has put forth, I'm not confident that I would be able to answer that same way. This struggle, by the way, won't just be military. It won't be about just ships and tanks. I'm a former M1 tank guy from a long time ago. This will be fought economically. In fact, I would argue the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the American people economically for 2 decades, and we just took it. We turned the other cheek and allowed some companies to make a lot of money. But the fight will be fought not only economically, but in cyber and in space. Today, we would prevail. But this is not a given. The Chinese Communist Party is intent on making sure that the next American Secretary of State, or the one after that, will answer that question differently, and everything turns on American leadership. And if we're prepared to do the things that we know we must do to protect and defend America, the same way President Reagan did in the 1980s, we've got to do the same thing here in the 2020s to protect and preserve American prosperity.
In a few minutes we have left, Mr. Secretary, Iran. Could the Iran situation been bungled worse than it has been under Joe Biden, who took President Trump's policies, turned them inside out? We had Iran on the run, the leadership there on the run. The people hate their leadership there, so-called leadership. Yeah. And now they're at ground zero with nuclear weapons.
No, the only thing that I think is worse that he's done was what happened in Afghanistan. 13 American lives left Americans behind. That sent a signal to the world that America was weak and no longer prepared to do the basic things that we've always done to protect our own. Iran's a perfect example. We had isolated them like never before. We built up the Abraham Accords. We had a great partnership with the nation of Israel, an important friend and ally in the region. And Biden and team, the same gang, Wendy Sherman, Susan Rice, the whole gang came back and just ripped it up. And now in the Middle East, folks won't take our phone calls. The Israelis now have some doubt about whether we'll really support them if they have to do something really difficult. This is bad for Israel, bad for the Arab states, bad for the Gulf, bad for America. And all they had to do was continue our policy. We had the Iranian leadership, the kleptocrats, the theocrats running that place. We had them in a bad place. We had given a lot of power to the Iranian people, and they just threw it all away.
When you look at the world, when you look at foreign policy, do you see anything this administration is doing right? I don't. It's like, where can we go in the world today to kick over every bucket that we see? Is it an ideological thing, a competence issue? What is it?
I think it's ideology and competence. I've been surprised by that. These are the professional government people. Mark, these folks love government. That's the left. I thought at least they would have bad policies executed competently. They've proven to have terrible policies executed horribly. I can't think of a place, I can't think of a nation that respects us more or wants to be our ally, or an adversary who fears us less than just, 18 months ago. That saddens me. That's not political for me. This is about America and my kids and all of our grandkids. I pray that they figure this out and get it right, but they put ideology, climate change at the top of their list, and they have executed so poorly that, frankly, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines around the world are at more risk too, and that really, really breaks my heart.
And something like gas and diesel fuel, with the prices going through the roof and potential shortages, doesn't that have an incredibly negative impact on the United States military and its ability to physically, mechanically operate?
Of course. Remember, President Biden said he was going to move to make all of our military equipment run on green energy. That's nuts, Mark. I mean, that is unfounded. We talk about the party of science. Sign me up for being part of that. We all know they're going to continue to use fossil fuels, and the fact that they're now twice as expensive, 3 times as expensive, means probably fewer training hours, fewer capability for the young soldier or the young Marine to actually go train and be prepared. No, you're absolutely right. It puts our military more at risk as well. And not having American energy produced here, when we have to go ask some knucklehead in Venezuela or some Iranian or some Russian for energy, that's really risky for our military as well.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for your service, starting your military service all the way up to Secretary of State. I want to thank you for the clarity of your voice. And I want to thank you for being a very loyal gentleman. I mean, you haven't written a tell-all book or done any of those things. And God bless you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Bless you, too. Have a great day.